They told us this was going to be a surgical strike. They told us the age of forever wars was over. They told us Donald Trump, the great deal maker, the self-styled terminator of Washington's endless military adventures, would bring peace to the Middle East. And then, on the 28th of February 2026, in the dead of night, American and Israeli bombs rained down on Tehran, and everything they told us turned out to be, as usual, a magnificent, catastrophic lie. And today, we are going to talk about what is actually happening, not the sanitized press releases from Washington, not Netanyahu's triumphalist theater, not the cheerful graphics on cable news showing missile trajectories as if this were a video game. We are going to talk about the raw, ugly, terrifying reality of a war that was never inevitable, a war that was chosen, planned, and executed while diplomats were still sitting at the negotiating table in Geneva. A war that has now turned the skies above Tel Aviv into a battlefield, sent hundreds of thousands of Israelis into bomb shelters night after night, and lit a fuse whose other end nobody can locate. The most expensive military machine in human history, the empire that has maintained 800 bases across the globe since the end of the Second World War, its soldiers are hiding in hotel rooms in Doha while Iranian drones circle overhead. This is not a military setback. This is a philosophical collapse. Let me give you the facts, because the facts are, as they so often are, more extraordinary than any fiction. On the 28th of February 2026, the United States and Israel launched a coordinated surprise attack on Iran during nuclear negotiations. The strikes killed Supreme Leader Khamenei, other Iranian officials, and civilians. They damaged military bases, government facilities, schools, hospitals, and cultural heritage sites. Think about what that means. During negotiations, while diplomats were talking, while Omani mediators were reporting significant progress, while Iran was, by all accounts, willing to make concessions. The mediating Omani foreign minister had stated significant progress, with Iran willing to make concessions. But President Trump said he was not thrilled with the talks. Not thrilled. And what did they hit? The US and Israel targeted nuclear facilities, ballistic missile infrastructure and radar installations, alongside specific strikes on leadership compounds and elements of Iran's military command structure. This is not limited to degrading capabilities at the margins. It is a direct blow to the state's security architecture and governing apparatus. In other words, they did not go to disarm, they went to decapitate. They went to collapse. They went, whether they admit it or not, for regime change, draped in the language of non-proliferation, gift wrapped with the rhetoric of freedom for the Iranian people. Khamenei was killed, his daughter, his son-in-law, his grandchild, dozens of senior officials. The defense minister, the commander of the Revolutionary Guard, the secretary of the National Security Council. The military said the operation was conducted with full synchronization and coordination between the Israeli and US militaries. And Trump, predictably, was triumphant on Truth Social within hours. Justice for the people of Iran, he declared. Justice, delivered at 30,000 feet, without a trial, without a vote, without a single debate in the United States Congress. But here is where I must tell you something that the mainstream commentariat is desperately trying to bury beneath their breathless coverage of missile interceptions and IDF press conferences. Iran did not fall. Iran did not collapse. Iran did not wave a white flag and beg for mercy. Iran fired back, with everything it had left. On the 5th of March 2026, a military source told Fars news agency that Iran had fired over 500 ballistic and naval missiles and almost 2,000 drones since the 28th of February. The report claimed that almost 40% of the launches were aimed towards Israel and almost 60% were fired towards US targets in the region. 500 missiles, 2,000 drones. Bahrain, Qatar, Saudi Arabia, the UAE, American bases across the Gulf lit up like targets in a shooting range. And then Hezbollah. Do not forget Hezbollah. Hezbollah blasted some 200 rockets and 20 drones at northern Israel for hours on one single evening, repeatedly sending hundreds of thousands of Israelis to shelters. That was just one night. Just one. Iran's powerful IRGC military force described the attack on Israel as a joint and integrated operation, with Hezbollah signaling something that should terrify every strategic analyst who was predicting a quick, clean victory. The axis of resistance, weakened as it undoubtedly is still capable of coordinated multi-front simultaneous assault. And then the total, by the 10th day of the war, Iran had fired a total of 300 missiles at Israel, of which nearly half had cluster submunitions, which can spread dozens of explosive warheads over a radius of 10 kilometers, a practice banned by the Convention on Cluster Munitions, an international treaty signed by more than 100 nations, but not by Iran. Cluster munitions aimed at residential neighborhoods in the Tel Aviv metropolitan area. Let me dwell on that for a moment. A missile struck a building in Tel Aviv, killing one and injuring dozens. Despite having advance notice of the Iranian missile launch, the sirens in the area did not sound in time to allow the 90 seconds allocated to make it to a sheltered space. 90 seconds. That is what stands between a Tel Aviv family and death. 90 seconds and the reliability of an air raid siren. A missile attack in a residential area of the city of Beit Shemesh struck a shelter in a synagogue. 9 civilians were killed and dozens were injured. 9 people sheltering in a synagogue, dead. This is war. not the cinematic war of press briefings and bomb damage assessments. The war of bodies in rubble and children in hospitals. An Iranian cluster missile fired at the Tel Aviv area wounded 12 people, including 6 children, with several impact sites reported. 6 children. And I asked the architects of Epic Fury, did they factor the 6 children into their strategic calculus? Did their spreadsheets, their war games, their intelligence assessments include a row for 6 children hit by cluster munitions in central Israel? I suspect they did not. I suspect they were too busy congratulating themselves for killing Khamenei and the economic fallout. Don't get me started, except that I must, because this is the dimension that almost nobody in the military-obsessed media is covering with the gravity it deserves. International shipping through the Strait of Hormuz remains largely halted due to Iranian military actions. The Strait of Hormuz, 21% of the world's daily oil supply, halted. Saudi Arabia, Qatar, Kuwait, and the United Arab Emirates reported Iranian attacks on energy sites after Israel struck Iran's South Pars gas field, an escalation that has caused oil and gas prices to surge. And the IMF warned that every 10% increase in energy prices over the course of 2026 is expected to increase global inflation by almost 0.5%. Global inflation, meaning prices at your supermarket, meaning your heating bill, meaning the cost of transporting every single good you consume. The working people of Europe, of Asia, of Latin America are now paying for a war they never voted for, never wanted, and will never benefit from. Now Netanyahu stands at his podium and declares victory. Iran can no longer enrich uranium and is no longer able to manufacture ballistic missiles, he says. Iran is weaker than ever, while Israel is a regional power, some would say a world power. This is the language of triumphalism from a man who has been governing through perpetual crisis for years, who faces corruption charges, who depends on the survival of this war for the survival of his government. Netanyahu needs this war to continue because Netanyahu needs Netanyahu to continue. Let us never forget that political survival and strategic judgment make very poor bedfellows. But look past the speeches. The IDF says it has killed at least 800 Hezbollah operatives in Lebanon since hostilities escalated. 800, and yet Hezbollah keeps firing. Iran and Hezbollah fired rockets at Israel just on the 30th of March, setting off widespread air raid sirens across the country's north and triggering emergency responses in the Haifa and Carmel regions. Fire broke out at the Haifa oil refineries after a direct hit. The Haifa oil refineries on fire on the 30th of March 2026. 5 weeks into a war that was supposed to be over in days. The parallel that Chatham House drew, and they are not exactly a hotbed of radical anti-imperialism, is one I want to place before you, because it is damning. The parallel with the 2003 Iraq War is difficult to ignore. That war demonstrated that collapsing or attempting to collapse a regime is far easier than shaping what follows. We destroyed Iraq and gave birth to ISIS. We destroyed Libya and gave birth to slave markets. And now we are attempting to destroy the Iranian state, a nation of 90 million people, with deep civilizational roots, with a complex internal political ecology that goes far beyond the theocratic regime Washington despises. And we are expected to believe that what follows will be a flowering of liberal democracy and regional peace. I have said it before, and I will say it as many times as it takes. The problem was never that we lacked the military power to destroy things. The problem is always that we lack the political wisdom to build what comes after. And no American president, not Obama, not Biden, and certainly not Donald Trump, has shown a single day of genuine commitment to that far harder, far more important task. US Director of National Intelligence Tulsi Gabbard testified that Iran's conventional military capabilities have largely been destroyed, but the regime appears intact. Intact. 5 weeks in, after the largest American military operation in the region since 2003, the regime is intact. Let that be your measure of what this war has achieved so far. And the cost keeps climbing. The Pentagon asked the White House to approve a request to Congress for more than $200 billion in additional war funding. $200 billion. At a time when the same administration has slashed food assistance, gutted foreign aid, dismantled climate programs, and told the American working class that there is no money for healthcare or housing. There is always money for bombs. There is never money for people. This is not an accident. This is a choice. A political choice made by people who will never have to crouch in a Tel Aviv bomb shelter with 90 seconds to spare, and who will never have to dodge cluster munitions on their way to a supermarket in Beit Shemesh. Let me tell you what this war is really about. It is not about nuclear weapons. Iran's enriched uranium is, according to the Iranian foreign minister himself, buried under the rubble of bombed facilities. Iran's foreign minister Abbas Araghchi said Iran's stockpile of highly enriched uranium is buried under the rubble, and that Tehran currently has no plan to recover it or negotiate its dilution. If the goal was non-proliferation, you could argue, though I would still argue against it, that something was achieved, but the war did not stop there. It never does. Because this war is about hegemony. It is about American dominance over the energy arteries of the global economy. It is about Israel's desire for a regional order in which it faces no credible military rival from the East. It is about the political calculus of leaders in Washington and Jerusalem who needed a war to solve their domestic crisis and chose to make the Middle East pay for it. And who is paying? The children in the synagogue shelter in Beit Shemesh. The foreign workers struck by cluster bomb submunitions outside a construction site in Yehud. The elderly residents of Ramat Gan who did not make it to their safe room in time. The Iraqi civilians killed in strikes on popular mobilization forces. The elementary school girls killed in Tehran. Girls in a school next to a military base dead. Iran says one attack killed over 100 girls at an elementary school near a military base. 100 girls in a school. I want to close, and I want to close with this, not because it offers comfort, but because it is the only honest thing I can say. This war was not inevitable. It was chosen. Chosen while diplomats were in Geneva. Chosen while Iran was, by all credible accounts, years away from a weapon. Chosen by people who believe that the world can be reorganized by force, that the Middle East can be reordered by bombs, that history bends to those with the most advanced air force. It cannot. It never has. And every generation that forgets this lesson is condemned to relearn it, paid for, as always, not by the statesmen who started it, but by the people who had no say in it at all. This is Yanis Varoufakis. Think carefully. Act politically. And do not let them tell you this was inevitable, because the most important lie of every war is always the claim that there was no alternative.